So this session is about the social dimensions of ecological restoration and communication science. I'd like to introduce the first speaker, Elizabeth Elliot-Hogg, who is a PhD student from the University of Waikato, Hamilton, New Zealand, who works in the field of restoration in urban context. And this one is focusing on the social side of her research. She also does biological research. Thank you.
Thank you. So I have lived all my life in cities. I was born in Manila, which is the capital of the Philippines. When I was 4, my family moved to Wrocław, which is the 4th largest city in Poland. For my undergraduate degree, I moved to Chicago, which is the 3rd most populous city in the United States. And then about 2 and a bit years ago, I moved to Hamilton in New Zealand to start my PhD at the University of Waikato. So that's 4 different cities on 4 different continents. But there are some things that all of these cities had in common. There are some things that I saw in every single one of these cities. So one of those things is the rock pigeon, the house sparrow, and the ship rat. In fact, one of my earliest memories is of my dad killing a rat behind our stove with a pitchfork. So this is what we call biotic homogenization, or the replacement of unique endemics with globally widespread species not native to the region. So why does this matter? Well, like me, most people these days are city people. Over half the world's population is living in urban areas, and about 86% of New Zealanders live in cities. This in turn has led to what ecologists are calling the extinction of experience. So this is a theorized cycle of increasing separation from nature in which each new generation is growing up in cities with ever decreasing levels of biodiversity. And the level that you experience during childhood is what you take to be the norm. So the main idea behind the extinction of experience is that we need personal experiences of things, especially during childhood, in order to care strongly about them. So we've got 2 things going on. We've got increasing numbers of people living in cities, increasing numbers of children growing up in cities, and we've got decreasing levels of native biodiversity in cities. So restoration ecology has been proposed as a way of addressing these 2 problems by providing native habitat in cities for our native flora and fauna, and by providing urban residents with an opportunity for daily contact with nature. So what I did for my PhD study, or for half of it, was I investigated Hamilton residents' perceptions and experiences of urban nature in parks that they frequently visit and in their own gardens. So here's just a quick map of where Hamilton is in New Zealand. So I had 21 participants. 7 were restoration volunteers. 7 were people who frequently used parks dominated by native vegetation, which from now on I'll call bush parks. And 7 were people who frequently used parks dominated by non-native vegetation. From now on I'll call those lawn parks. So we conducted semi-structured go-along interviews, and the go-along part simply means that I asked people to give me a tour of the park they use on a regular basis and of their garden. And the goal of these interviews was a comprehensive, in-depth exploration of each individual's experiences of urban nature. So the themes brought up by our participants fell naturally into dichotomies. Dichotomies are defined as 2 mutually exclusive and contradictory groups or entities. So some of the dichotomies brought up by our participants were that of urban nature versus wild nature. So what sort of nature is acceptable in a city context versus outside the city limits? Native versus introduced and where these belong? Garden versus park and what these should look like? Tidy versus messy and how much of each is acceptable? Values versus practicality, so what people value versus what they see as practical, and so what they're actually doing. Protecting natives versus encouraging park use. So as suggested by Sprague and Zimmerman, We present dichotomies not as exclusive and contradictory categories between which we have to choose, but as evidence of the tensions we must struggle to integrate. So my next two slides, the pictures are sort of spot the tension pictures. So in this one, you've got an endemic New Zealand bird, the tui, feeding on an introduced invasive cherry. So this picture my friend thought was an illustration of complete relaxation. It is not, it's a cat in a bird bath. So the cat might be completely relaxed, but I doubt the birds are. So the overarching dichotomy in our study was a disconnect between what people claim to value and what they're actually doing. And this seemed to stem from the fact that people had conflicting and competing priorities. According to Michael Billig, social psychologists have been discomforted to find that general attitudes are poor predictors of people's actions. However, from a rhetorical perspective, there may be more to be gained by forgetting prediction and by concentrating upon that gap between the general attitude and the specific action. So now I'll briefly go into some of these themes in a little bit more detail. So most of my participants claimed to prefer native plants, but their gardens were always dominated by introduced species. And often this is simply the case because such a big proportion of people's gardens is taken up by lawns. And also, as I said earlier, people had conflicting and competing priorities. So while they wanted to see native plants, they also wanted productive vegetable gardens and fruit trees, and they enjoyed the colorful flowers and leaves of introduced trees. People also struggled with the impracticality of large trees. So while they loved large trees in parks, in their own gardens they were worried about trees falling on houses, branches falling, leaves blocking gutters, and trees blocking out the sunlight. So one way people had of dealing with this conflict between introduced and native plants is they would allocate separate spheres for the different types. So they'd have an area of their garden that they saw as it should be native, so these were shady areas, gully sections, and then everywhere else they were happy having a mix. So mixing native and introduced was acceptable in cities, but it was seen as completely unacceptable in bush parks outside the city. People's perceptions of birds were overwhelmingly positive, whether or not the bird was native to New Zealand. For most people, bird encounters were a great source of excitement and delight. However, you did have some people that just sort of took birds for granted. They saw birds as part of the background. They didn't really notice them. So here's a quote from one of those participants. In one sense, I suppose, you kind of just take birds for granted. It wouldn't be until they were gone that you'd know that they weren't there. But even these people who couldn't name any birds, they couldn't recognize any calls, they still thought that birds contributed to the meanings that they held for their parks and gardens. Because you see, for us too, the birds and that sort of stuff, not that I could ever suggest to you that I'm into ornithology or know what birds are what, but you know that type of thing, the wildlife, is part of this place and it makes it what it is for us, you know? So from the other group of people who knew quite a few birds, they could recognize their calls, some people talked about the importance of creating habitat for our native species in cities. So here's a quote from one of those participants. We definitely want to encourage these, talking about native birds. We've hammered these species really hard the last 100 years, and really what we're trying to do is give them a chance. I wouldn't go so far as to say that I want all parks to look like this, talking about a bush remnant, because I like these parks too, talking about a lawn park. So basically you want to have it all, don't you? I mean, because all these other birds, the non-natives, they're actually quite beautiful too. So a really quick word on gardening for birds, in that it was not happening. So none of my participants designed their gardens with birds in mind, and the attractiveness of certain features of the garden to birds was always more of a happy coincidence than anything else. So the last source of tension that I'll talk about today was that over cat ownership. So my participants fell roughly into two groups on this issue. One group, as one person put it, claimed to be philosophically against cats. They saw them as being incompatible with New Zealand's native wildlife, and they thought that a complete mindset change was needed over the issue of cat ownership in New Zealand. The other group was made up of people who owned cats, so they were torn between their enjoyment of the companionship provided by their pet cat and their desire to see birds in their gardens. So to conclude, at this point, it doesn't seem like private gardens in Hamilton can be relied on to contribute substantially to ecological restoration. City Council needs to invest more resources in restoration of public green spaces and in promoting wildlife gardening. Finally, further research should focus on this gap between what people claim to value versus what they're actually doing. So I'd like to thank my supervisors, Bruce Clarkson, Ottilie Stolt, John Innes, and Chaitanya Joshi, my volunteers, the 21 interview participants, funders. Are there any questions?
We do have time for a couple of questions, so do we have any questions from the floor? Virginia.
Yeah. Experience extinction. Oh dear. What happens if someone hasn't grown up with a complex local ecosystem? Is there any way that they can get that connection later in life?
I would say definitely. And I'm sort of an example of someone who grew up in a city surrounded by pigeons and sparrows and that sort of thing, and I still ended up interested in nature and sort of sought that out. So there is an argument to be made that even these terrible introduced species could sort of push you in that direction, but I definitely would argue that we still need to get more native into the city.
Lovely. Thank you. Another question? Another comment from anyone? No? Okay, well, thank you very, very much. That was excellent. I'd now like to introduce Guy Boggs. Guy Boggs is from the Western Australian Biodiversity Science Institute, that's it. And the Institute works, he'll explain it much better, linking industry, government and research.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me today. So I'm with an organisation quite newly formed within the last couple of years within Western Australia called the WA Biodiversity Science Institute, and I'm going to chat a little about our role, who we are, and what we've learned so far in connecting restoration science policy and industry. So just a starting point, of course, I'm from Western Australia. Western Australia is special, it's important, it's very different to the rest of the country. We all know it. So yes, look, the evidence is there. What's really interesting, of course, is that we also have had the mining boom and a re-emerging mining boom, so that the tension and the demand for ecological restoration is at a magnitude that never was before. So the Pilbara Rehabilitation Initiative highlighted that we've gone up an order of magnitude in terms of our mining footprint. We've got a long history of agricultural development. We've probably generated a lot of debate and discussion around landscape ecology and restoration practice because of our history of agriculture. And to add to the list now, we have the longest city in the world because of urban sprawl. So we have a lot of demand for ecological restoration. My talk and the role of WABSI is to think about how we're bridging across science, policy, government, end users, community groups. This is a really important slide, I think, in Australia. The Australian research community and the Australian practitioner community, government sector, do not engage well. And this is quite different to the rest of the world. We have the worst rate of collaboration between industry and the research sector out of all the OECD countries. I like to think of that as an opportunity.
Is that something different from Australia too?
Yeah, no, I'm blaming the whole Australia for that one. That's okay. That's Australia-wide. But it gets you thinking about, well, how does research and policy and the like actually interact? The figure on the left is from a recent paper that was looking at different models of policy and research. At its quite simplistic level, we can think about research driving the policy agenda, which I'm sure all researchers would like to do. Why don't the government people just do what we've found out needs to be done? Likewise, there's politics driving the research agenda. Well, we'll control the money strings, so we will invest in research that we want, therefore we can control the research that's being done, and so policy is driving research. The third model is where you've actually got research and policy, and I'm using policy here in a broader context of end users, where you've got this co-actionable model, where you're actually working together iteratively in the development of research and policy agendas. And the fourth model is one where those sectors are recognised as being very independent. They shouldn't mix, but there should be some sort of active osmotic barrier that would allow permeation across that barrier. Where we're focused is on that third model. And I've also put up a slide from the recent review of the Australian Innovation, Science and Research System, which just again highlighted these issues. Australia is up there in terms of knowledge creation. We have some of the best researchers in the world, there's no doubt about that. Again, where we perform really badly are on the metrics that talk about collaboration. Who from here is not an academic? Beautiful. Or researcher, scientist? How many of you guys have been a co-author on a paper, on a published peer-reviewed paper? Yeah, cool. So that's one of the top 5 metrics that they use for indicating collaboration is actually co-authorship on peer-reviewed publications, which is an interesting one because it's not something that's valued necessarily by practitioners or industry or government, but it is a demonstration that there's been an intellectual contribution by all partners to a piece of work. So we're working, and the other thing that I think is really important about that diagram is thinking about the innovation spectrum. Often we think research, policy, research and things. We're all members of this innovation spectrum, and there are a lot of different actors that are important in generating knowledge, transferring knowledge and applying that knowledge. So WABS is a facilitator and enabler. We are an unincorporated joint venture between 4 universities in Western Australia, the CSIRO, a number of the research active government departments, Biodiversity and Conservation Tractors, Botanic Garden and Parks Authority, the WA Museum, and also the government regulatory agencies, including mines, industry, regulation safety, water and environmental regulation, and primary industries and regional development, and jobs, tourism, science and innovation. So that captures a lot of regulatory and science capacity in the state. Sounds wonderful, and all of our strength is actually through those partners. We are funded, we're part of the science strategy for the state. We sit under the chief scientist, funding-wise, and we actually only have half a dozen staff within our office. So we are here to bring people together, to prioritise and get to see the work being done that is actually addressing the challenges facing biodiversity, conservation and sustainable development in our state. I'm going to chat a little bit on some of the things that I've been working on in terms of prioritising around mine rehabilitation closure, ag land restoration at scale, a little bit in the urban forest domain and biodiversity information across the state. I also wanted to again highlight within this diagram, we've heard the word, I've probably heard interdisciplinary more than multidisciplinary today. I think it is important that we think about the differences between interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary, and for me, the only key difference is transdisciplinary is about embedding everybody in that knowledge generation process. Multi and interdisciplinary are about actually different disciplines coming together, but it's not necessarily about different knowledge domains. The other thing that's really important in that diagram is actually thinking about the fact that particularly in our domain, the reason why those things don't come together very well is that societal practice and societal demands, that the measures, the reward structure are very different to the scientific practice. And so you actually need to have when you're developing transdisciplinary activities or co-actionable activities, you need outcomes that are both useful to the scientific partners and useful to the societal practice, and they need to be balanced throughout the program development. So in my space, looking at restoration research, prioritising and action, there's a lot of, in this restoration space, we focus a lot on tools and technologies, and for at the state scale, I have a theme area which is balanced on restoration tool development and particularly ex situ conservation approaches, reintroduction programs as well, and then overarching those is a program which is talking about goal setting. But that is quite different when you're thinking about the urban sector, the mining sector and the ag land. Take the mining sector for one, we've got a really heavily regulated space. There are very strong levers that you can pull within the regulatory environment to drive restoration outcomes. You go to the southwest agricultural landscape and you're talking about adoption models, farm practice change, you're talking about land care models and public investment. The landscape for restoration is very different. We need those technologies to cross borders. I worked in the ag sector previously. I think they were streets ahead in terms of soils, soil understanding, soil process, soil quality. That knowledge should be going into the mining sector. In terms of ecological restoration, I actually have found that the mining sector is driving a lot more R&D and knowledge generation that I think would really benefit flowing over into the ag space a lot better. So how do we actually make sure that we're getting knowledge transfer across all these different areas? I've put in there two mechanisms that are certainly working outside of those domains. One is this concept of a biodiversity information office, which is about collating biodiversity data at a state and national scale and trying to grab any form of biodiversity data into that space. The other one is this concept of a platform for ecological restoration research infrastructure, or PERI, which is about embedded experiments, about actually developing an adaptive management system where we've got science and practitioners working together on particular sites. So just talking about that Biodiversity Information Office, so Mike Young, who's here, will be talking a lot about this on Wednesday afternoon. The West Australia, because we're special, is the first to have a system where we're tracking all biodiversity survey data that's undertaken for Part 4, Part 5 assessments within the EPA and putting that data into the public domain. So anyone can access that data. It is as surveyed, there's no manipulation, it's as surveyed. Stage 2, we're now looking at, well, how do we grow our data sources into that space? Mining companies are actually willing to contribute back data, and they've been heavily involved in the consultation process. They're actually willing to volunteer, in terms of dollar values worth of data into the system. We also can expand that into the NRM domains, but we really want to go from just collating data to a system where we've curated it and we're starting to have more informed decision-making processes. And I put at the bottom there in particular cumulative impact assessment processes. So we need to go from site scale, individual assessments, but we need large sums of data to actually look at landscape scale processes. Oh, that's my time. The second one, which Linda will hopefully bring up tomorrow in your presentation at 11 a.m, is this concept of the platform for ecological research, restoration research infrastructure. What we're really trying to do there is build a nationally networked suite of embedded short and long-term experiments. And again, we heard David Lindemeyer talking this morning about we've had 10, 20, 30 years, over $7 billion invested through NLP equivalent programs with very little documented outcomes and understanding of outcomes from that. Lots of R&D in the late 90s in Western Australia and early 2000s, and some really great base data that we could go back to, but no opportunity to do that going forward. So we need practitioners and scientists to actually develop these experiments together. So it becomes a mechanism to support adaptive management and track long-term outcomes. One of the things that I think is really important in this domain is practitioners and researchers actively working together. When you're out there working on a site where the plants are going in the ground, or you're manipulating the soils, or you're measuring an outcome, and you've got scientists and practitioners working side by side on that, I think the opportunities for knowledge and learning together are much better. The other thing that's really important is this: we need to have a prioritisation for ecological research questions. So the framework, the SERA guidelines for for restoration provide actually a really good starting point for bringing the community together and actually have addressed a gap in the way that we've operated as a broader community. I think this likewise provides an opportunity for us to say, well, actually, what are the priority questions we would like to address as a restoration community at a local, regional or national scale? I've put in here, so Tom Atkinson talked a little bit more this morning about the Row 8 space. Row 8 was a really controversial issue within Western Australia. The government was the new government was elected in on the basis that they would rehabilitate the roadway that was cleared to extend that road. And scientists, researchers were out there protesting likewise, and they weren't seen as a stakeholder group by the government when they were doing the planning. So one of the things that WABSI did, I think, quite well was actually have provide a vehicle to coordinate the voice of the research community into that planning process. Okay, restoration target setting. So Renee Young has talked about the state completion criteria framework that we've been working on. So this hierarchy, I think we forget how important the mitigation hierarchy is. You know, we are always, and it came up also in the economics conversation, balancing, avoid, minimise, rehabilitate, and of course offset. And we're still figuring out how to do that. How do we actually make sure that we're setting really good restoration targets, rehabilitation outcomes, balanced against offsets, balanced against avoid and minimise? How do we do that better? Extending on that, Marit will be undertaking a review of rehabilitation condition setting in the state. Continuing in the mining sector, we've got a really great group of mining companies in the Pilbara, driven by an EPA report from 2012 that indicated that their restoration was not delivering on what they had indicated would happen. Those companies have now been working for a few years together on shared research investment and integration. Actually, they're quite a good group, and I think an important thing for this one is that they operate independently and will bring in research, and that they take ownership of that. So we're supporting that activity, and you can see on the side there some of their research prioritisation. Also, we're working on a cooperative research centre bid for achieving sustainable mine closure. If it gets up, and we'll find out this week if it'll proceed to stage 2, it'll be a 10-year initiative worth $150 million. We've got 20 government and industry partners, 15 research partners currently working on it, and all working on the R&D that's going to deliver better policy and strong communication questions around end land use. So we're actually delivering a mine closure space where restoration and rehabilitation are tied to relinquishment. Finally, in the ag space, I think Western Australia, again, has a really interesting history here. We've got wonderful land care groups. Gondwana Link is world recognised as a large-scale landscape-scale connectivity success story, and yet, when you look at the overarching figures, despite the investment, despite the level of activity, we are going backwards in terms of net vegetation loss, which is crazy when some of these places only have less than 10% remaining vegetation. There is a massive gap between the resources required to meet the target. So we've got a shared goal that we've workshopped with people. When you think about a shared goal and what's required to achieve that goal, we're orders of magnitude away from being able to do that. So practice will help drive that. But most importantly, and Kingsley talked about it, we need to drive a restoration economy. We need to develop the economic and social factors that are going to drive large-scale investment if we're actually going to deliver on those shared restoration goals. And in conclusion, the question here is with innovation. So in the restoration space, are we missing the wheel that's on the side? How do we find that wheel to achieve the goals that I think we all share in this room? Thank you very much.
We might even have time for a question. Yes.
Thanks for your prayers. Sorry if this question's a bit away from your core work, but you mentioned a key priority was fire management, but you also mentioned you have the longest city anywhere. Does the fire management or the research go into bushfire risk, particularly around built environments, or is it more about landscape level ecological burns? I mean, and I know the two are related, but could you speak about that a bit?
So one that's not in my theme area. So Bruce Webber from CSIRO has been seconded into WABSI to look after threatening processes, and fire fits in within his space. He's probably looking at landscape scale fire at the moment. In terms of the urban domain, we're looking at urban forest planning and green infrastructure. So that seems to be something that's coming out of local government planning drives, and links to the previous speaker as well, that people are actually demanding to have green infrastructure in their built environment. And I guess fire for us in that context is we've certainly had NRM regions and the like talking about restoration, and it's, if we're building all these corridors and connectivity, well, what are the issues here for wildfire spread in built domain?
Fantastic, thank you again. Excellent, thank you, Guy Boggs. And we'd like to introduce Basil Schur, who's from Green Skills, Denmark, WA, and a fascinating talk to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I'm another WA, but I hope in this talk to really inspire all of you to start thinking using video making films for promoting eco-restoration. So is that a bit better? So about 4 years ago, I started getting enthusiastic about how we might promote our projects through using YouTube in particular, but making short films. And with smartphones and current technology, the capacity to make short videos is now with all of us, although we can work with filmmakers. And I just acknowledge the filmmakers and the funding bodies that have helped bring some of these films to light. So what I'll be focusing on is our films to try and promote Gondwana Link, which is the landscape scale project that covers lower southwest of Western Australia. It stretches all the way from Margaret River to the Great Western Woodlands, and the area that the films focus on that relate to green skills and our project partners on the central zone of the Gondwana Link program. So why would we want to make short films? And there's tremendous value in having our documentation of our projects uploaded to the web, where a single link you can send to your volunteers, to project partners, to funding bodies, as an archive documenting the history of our work. There's so many values of having our films up on the web where we can quickly access them in just a short link and embed that in all sorts of reports, funding, grants and so on. So I'd like to illustrate what can be done with making short films with this one. This is documenting one of the very first properties bought for eco-restoration in Gondwana Link. Hopefully you can see how much you can put in. A picture tells 1,000 words, but films actually can also cover a great deal of country very quickly. And just how did we make it? We worked with a local filmmaker who comes out of the NRM world. That's Craig Carter, and that's him on site, just using a Canon SLR camera to document. And he's gone from he's started a small business in local filmmaking, so it's been great to support him in documenting things like eco-restoration. The other great thing is that you don't have to bring them out for every event. You can also access the archive of films and photos that all of us have in our organisations. So bear with me while I just set up the video, and we'll watch an excerpt from it.
Nijanonga boja nunak nini. Nijanonga boja nunak nini. Nijanonga ngalak ngak. This is Nonga country we are sitting here. This is Nonga country. This is our motherland. The Puja, special place for Tonga people.
Chingarup Sanctuary is a 576 hectare bushland property situated beside the Karakarup Creek inland of Bremer Bay on Western Australia's south coast. A Perth-based couple, Eddie and Donna Wayon, purchased this land for conservation in 2002. It was the very first property acquired for ecological restoration as part of the Gondwana Link.
We've effectively owned this property since 2002, 14 years, and we bought it to preserve bushland and enjoy the wildflowers, but it's turned out to be more than that. It's turned out to be an ecological restoration journey as well. We now have about 450 species of flora on our property that we know of, 550 fauna species, including 105 birds and 250 moths. And this is all through the cooperation of people, friends, organisations throughout the world and locally. Just an amazing, involvement of people and knowledge that we've gathered on the property.
One of the really interesting things about the property is that we are seeing now malleefowl every single time we come. And they stroll, they kind of waddle here and there, and they were under the fruit orchard. I was weeding there, and they came and were eating the grubs underneath, and you could see them scratching the ground. Just such a wonderful feeling to have these beautiful birds come back onto the property.
A key part of the Gondwana Link vision is reconnecting habitats between the Stirling Range and Fitzgerald River National Parks. Greening Australia replanted 80 hectares of cleared land on the property. Over the years, the ongoing work at Chingarup has been helped by Green Skills, the Conservation Council of WA, Bush Heritage, other groups and many volunteers, all carrying out a range of management, research and monitoring. So much has happened here. Bird mist netting, fauna pit trapping, bird nest surveys, moth light trapping, baiting for feral predators, bat detecting, plant surveys and wildlife photography, restoration planting and monitoring, dieback hygiene measures, stream monitoring, all helping to increase our ability to care for the natural environment. One of the features of the area are the river pools along the Chingarup and Karakarup creeks. They form part of the life-nourishing wetlands across Gondwana Link, providing a special refuge for a wide range of wildlife, especially in times of drought. Geraldine and Steve Janicki are river ecologists surveying the health of these streams.
These river pools here in the Karakarup and Chingarup, they're terrific pools in that they've got good, long, deep pools within them that are refugia for all sorts of aquatic animals and the birds, of course, as well. They're moderately healthy, which is fantastic, and it's exciting to see all the re-veg work, and it'd be really interesting to see how that impacts all these river pools over the coming years, because I believe that they will. Early reports were that there was fresh water in the Karakarup, so there must be areas where there's little freshwater seeps, and it'll be great to see those come back, and the different aquatic biota as things come back into the system again. Some of the things that we tend to find in these river pools are, there's a range of fish. You've got your Swan River goby. We often find the minnow and also a hardyhead. So they're all species that are tolerant of a range of salinities, and the invertebrates that live there, many of them are the food sources for the fish. And of course the fish are food sources for your grebes and cormorants that live in the area as well.
The river pools also have great cultural significance to the Menang Noongar people.
So the film then goes on to document Noongar cultural values for, oops, sorry, I'll just go back to where I was. And yeah, so that's the second half. So in these short films, you can cover quite a wide range of both documenting citizen science, eco-restoration, and also cultural connections. So we've since gone on to do probably around 9 or 10 of these short films. This was one of our early ones as well on key property Valaja. We've done them also on a catchment scale. This is around the Wilson Inlet. And we tend to keep them between 5 and 10 minutes. The emphasis, that you hear all the time, you've got to keep things short and sharp. So 9 minutes for this one actually is a bit on the long side, but we felt we had a lot of info to get across. And again, some more pictures of being out on site, doing, documenting field days and interviewing on site. There's more cultural surveys with elders. This is doing field days, so almost all your field days can reach a much bigger audience than just the 30 or 50 people you get by documenting them, having someone do that, and then putting it on YouTube. There's some of the range of films. These are the cover shots, and that we've done in the last 2 or 3 years. And I'm now really sold on the idea that we can preserve knowledge of all these events that we run, which often reach a small number of people, and with effective promotion can reach a much larger one. So how do we do that? Once we've got a film, what's the way of making sure that it reaches as many people as possible? Now, we've never been successful in getting a film go viral. We hope for that. Probably the most, we're up to about 900 or 1,000 hits over a couple of years. So the key thing is, these are some hints for you to think about as you upload your own YouTube films, is, the cover image has to capture a lot. The title has to be really accessible, so that's where you're using marketing techniques. So you're using all your graphic skills in presenting as if it's a poster. 3 more minutes. So what happens on YouTube, you can set it up for free, but you can set up your own channel, and there's all our YouTube clips down the side. So once someone clicks on one, they can rapidly go on to all the others. YouTube itself is a great source for learning out how to promote yourself on YouTube. There's a whole lot of great how to do it ones. When you set up the page, there's all sorts of key ways to increase the number of hits. You've got all your key indicator words there. Again, it's the outline you have, it's the title, it's whether you allow comments and feedback, and so on. But once you've done it, it takes an hour or 2 to upload your film, depending how big it is, and then you've got your clip, and it's a matter of promoting that on as many websites as you can, cross-sharing, and increasing the number of people that do the hits. So, they're encourage all of you to start, if you aren't already, and I know later on in this session, we're hearing from RegenTV. We're doing a great job in documenting everything they're doing. So I encourage you, let's get the word out. We've got so much, we need to get to a much bigger audience than we've done so far if we're going to get eco-restoration funded and up there with politicians and the broader community. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Basil. We do have a couple of minutes for questions. Does anybody have a question for Basil? No? Okay, well that's bloody marvellous. I think it's really exciting, and I was sold. He sold me, that's for sure, on that one. Next we have Nikola Manos. Nikola is going to be talking about urban watercourse restoration heroes.
Thank you. So I'm Nikola Manos from the City of Onkaparinga in South Australia, and I'd like to introduce you to our creek heroes. They were a massively important part of an urban watercourse ecological restoration project that we embarked on. That we embarked on a few years ago. And they illustrate some of the key features that our local community might see in their local creek if it's a healthy watercourse. And
Along with the creek bullies, which are their villain counterparts, which I'll introduce you to later, they played a really important tool in what became known as the Urban Creek Recovery Project. So today I want to tell you why we developed these characters and the role that they played and the impact that they've had. So do you remember playing in your local creek as a kid? Maybe catching some tadpoles and yabbies? And we've heard from other people how a lot of kids these days don't get those opportunities. They kind of miss out for a number of reasons, which I won't go into. But as part of the Urban Creek Recovery Project, we decided to invite families and children back into the creeks to experience nature and have a play. It all started in 2012. I just got back to work from maternity leave, and someone tapped us on the shoulder and said, "Guess what, you're managing all the creeks now." And we thought, what a fantastic opportunity to restore or to continue to restore the work that we've already done and expand it along vegetation corridors. But we asked ourselves a few questions. How many creeks are there? Where are they? What condition are they in? And how much money have we got to manage these creeks? And this is what we found. Not a lot. We found there was no spatial information, so we didn't actually know how many kilometres of creeks that we had and how many hectares. And there certainly wasn't any data about the condition except for the ones that we were already managing, and there wasn't a lot of funding. And in terms of condition, a lot of them tended to look like this. They were quite neglected, full of rubbish, and densely infested with thickets of woody weeds, so it's almost impenetrable, and a lot of them you couldn't even tell there was a creek underneath all the weeds. The funding that we had was operational funding, was used to address woody weeds and pest plants, and it was mostly driven by community complaints about flooding, fire hazard and places looking untidy, so it wasn't very strategic. So we thought, well, we need to start somewhere, we can do it better, we really want to be strategic in how we spend the little money that we had. So we set out and we spoke to our spatial information team. They're a fantastic group of people, and we mapped all the parcels on council land that are along watercourses that you can see highlighted in the darker colours, and we found in the end we had 72 kilometres across 9 catchments, so quite a bit. And in order to work out what was what, we gave them each a unique segment ID, so each parcel of land, starting from upstream, this one is Sturt River, is SR1, and so on, so that we knew what we had and where they were. The next step we took was a desktop survey. We just gathered all the information that we had about those parcels of land to help us prioritise what we needed to do. So we looked at things like the size of the parcel of land. It was quite rough. Whether we're aware of any native vegetation present on those sites, whether it was upper story, middle or ground covers, whether there were any known species of conservation significance and vegetation communities, and whether there was any work occurring adjacent to those sites in terms of restoration works. So we took all that data and we did some very rough costing and set some priorities. Perfect timing. The federal government announced a funding source through Caring for Our Country with urban watercourses as a priority. So we had everything ready to go to apply for funding, and we were lucky enough to get $1.625 million from the Australian government. And we're already working closely with the Adelaide Mount Lofty Rangers NRM board, who kicked in $500,000 over 5 years to restore 52 kilometres of those 72. They're the ones we'd identified as priorities in our region. As we were about to embark on the project, we identified a really big risk, and that is a lot of people, from experience, are quite attached to some of the woody weeds. So when you go in with a chainsaw, people tend to get a little bit upset, and experience also taught us if we go in and say, we're the experts, we're going to fix that creek for you and everything will be fine, people and show them technical documents and brochures to tell them exactly the damage that these weeds do. people tend to not take that on board, get quite upset, rally other neighbours, and then that's when you get people in the media standing there like this, looking really angry and with their arms crossed, and it could potentially halt this massive project that we're about to embark on. So we thought we'll have some fun with this. We decided to create a project identity so that everyone knew what we were going to be doing. We're going to inform people every step of the way, before, during and after the project, and it's going to be interactive, so we're going to be there talking to people and we're going to involve them. So the first, creating a project identity, we created the Urban Creek Recovery logo. The species was a common froglet that's quite common in our region and everyone can easily recognise, and a lot of people love frogs. We made sure that we used that logo at every project site, so we had the site signage, we used it in the media, we sent letters out to people, we had stickers, we used it on clothing. All our contractors had A-frames up, so whenever works were occurring, people would see that logo, and a lot of feedback we got at events is, oh yeah, I've seen that frog logo around, so it became quite recognisable. And then we created the Creek Bullies. So the characters are based on the woody weeds that, when we remove them, that we get the most complaints about. And the idea came from Ben Moulton, my colleague, who was inspired by some of the cartoonists that, and Lunik was mentioned before, so, and also people like The First Dog on the Moon in The Guardian, so people who use humour and illustrations to portray an important message without losing that technical detail. We engaged a local illustrator who worked with a graphic designer. So these were done by Louis de Crevel. He was just finishing his degree at uni and he's now quite sought after as an illustrator. And we turned them into brochures. So I've brought some with me, so if anyone wants to grab some after the session. The Creek Heroes brochure follows a comic book style story where an interviewer talks to each of the characters, and the bullies give a criminal profile of all the culprits based on their weedy characteristics, so it's like an investigator's notebook, and they're also available on our website. We gave each of the weeds a weed habit rating, so whether they block the sun and pollute the water, as a way to get people to think about, well, what is it about that plant that makes it a weed? I find that really useful when I go give tours with school groups to get the kids to think about it for themselves. But we also made sure that our the fun part of the project was backed by technical knowledge and data. So we've created an online story map that we've provided all our monitoring data on. We've established hundreds of photo points at all 147 project sites. So this one shows a section of creek 4 years apart in terms of the restoration works that are occurring. And we have mapped the density every year of 11 different weed species. And we've had to break it down into 1 hectare segments because the areas were just too huge. Shows the density of the weed, and when you're actually on the story map online, you can take a bar, scroll it across, and you can see the density changing over time. That's done across the whole region. And we involved people. It was easier than we thought. So we had about 1,000 people coming to community planting events, from schools to, there was an existing group of older volunteers. And we partnered up with Zoos SA. They were almost completing their frog spotter app, and we helped them get that over the line by contributing a bit of funding. So now we have a way for people to contribute through citizen science, so by listening to frog calls and providing that data. We hosted hundreds of events. So this one is a nature play-based event called Wild Zone Adventures. We had 500 people turn up. We had activities ranging from Indigenous basket weaving, water bug monitoring, and it's all about creating those nature experiences for families. Overall, we had about 5,000 people that came to our events. They don't all have to be as complex as this. Something as simple as exploring nature by night, which has been extremely popular. We're going to hold our next one next week. And all it is meet us at dusk, bring a torch, and let's see what wildlife we can spot. Our next event was booked out with on the same day of going up onto Facebook, and we had to cap it at 60 people. We even made it onto Network 10's Totally Wild children's TV series. That was a lot of fun. That shows my colleague Ben finishing off and doing a role. The project achievements, the results speak for themselves. We've exceeded all our expectations that we had at the beginning of the 5-year project. And given the scale of the project, we've had very few complaints. And the few that we did have, we met people on site, negotiated. Sometimes we did a few compromises. But overall, nothing hit the media, which we were very relieved about. And in fact, we had so many people asking for watercourses near their house to be restored that we were able to increase our results by 10 kilometres from our initial project plan through finding other internal funding. So I'd like to finish off. Where are we at now? The project has just finished. We're now in a maintenance phase of the project. Through the high profile within the community, the council has seen that it's a really important thing to do, and they've just agreed to increase our operational funds so we can continue to maintain those sites. The monitoring that we've put online has made us publicly accountable so everyone can see what we've achieved for that investment. Our project partner has already agreed, so in our own board, to fund another $50,000 of on-ground works into areas that we haven't touched yet. They're quite degraded, as you can imagine. And we've put on a dedicated environmental volunteer coordinator to help support more on-ground volunteer works. This is an example of a volunteer group called Yaka. They're a local youth group, and they've just adopted a section of creek in their township, and they're going to do some ecological restoration works there, and they're very excited. And the project has now become a program, and we're very proud to have finished it. It's been a long 5 years. Thank you.
Boy, that's a very moving story, isn't it? It's extremely successful, and we do have a little bit of time for questions. So if anybody got any questions or observations? Todd.
Yes. We've gradually increased, so it was a bit of a strategy, gradually increased our operational funds every year so that it didn't come too much of a shock to council. And we've got a good team to be able to do that, and the community's behind it, which was part of the strategy. So, yeah, we will.
What about you?
Just to say, what a wonderful story, thank you. I was interested in your app with your mobile app that you said where you had monitoring data and citizen science data going. Are people using that? Are they thinking they're accessing some of that monitoring information?
They are. We've set up our own group. We probably could focus on getting more and more people involved. So the uptake hasn't been as much as I wanted to. I was hoping we'd get some monitoring at every single of the 147 sites, but haven't quite got there yet. So it's only been running for nearly 2 years now. So we're going to definitely promote that more. And citizen science is something I really want to get into a lot more.
One more.
What system are you using to capture that monitoring? Is it your own app that was developed specifically for you, or is it like a...
We evolved it over time, so we were using a GTAC handheld device at the beginning, and that didn't work quite so well. We're just doing it on our mobile phones now, using Collector app. And yeah, with our spatial information team, they're quite talented, and one of the guys who set that up for us has a little bit of ecological restoration background, so that was really helpful.
And just very finally, what sort of technical expertise or ecological expertise has been drawn on for the practical work, the on-ground works?
So My senior officer, Ben Moulton, has a huge amount of experience in ecological restoration at a state government level and then came to the City of Onkaparinga. We've put on one extra staff member for the project that has technical expertise in that, so he's a dedicated watercourse officer, and we also have 2 other staff members, so there's a team of 4 across the region.
That sounds fantastic. Thank you very, very much, Nicola. Our last speaker today is Louise Brodie and Virginia Bear, who are tag teaming on this one. They're from the Australian Association of Bush Regenerators RegenTV project. I'll leave that for you. Just got to get this video going. I'm Louise Brodie, and this is Virginia Bear. And now, we're going to talk about our project RegenTV, and during the course of that we're going to show you some of the footage that you might see if you look at one of our videos, and Virginia is demonstrating how to film a speaker at somewhere like this, and you will have seen her up the back doing bits and pieces. I thought I'd just explain how the name RegenTV, because we suddenly thought about it and thought, oh, it's an interesting name. And I guess it's from the term bush regeneration, which is historically how, in Australia especially, we describe restoration of terrestrial ecosystems, even though in this project we're a little bit wider than that. And regenerators generally call themselves people who carry out regen. So we thought RegenTV, and then when I thought about it, I thought, well, that's better than Restore TV or Rehab TV. So, and the main purpose of the presentation is to tell you what we're doing and to get you excited about the possibility of looking at various projects and things that we've done, so that you'll all rush home and turn on your internets and look at Basil's videos and look at our videos. Yes, so at this point, Virginia is now going to take over and talk a little bit. We're going to do a tag team, but we cut out the tap dancing.
So this is the field rig, and we've been taking that around the remnants of the big scrub rainforest around Lismore this last weekend on the conference field trip. And that's been a real gathering of amazing people with so much knowledge and experience coming together and spontaneous conversations happening. And we've just been trying to chase after it and catch it. And it's so important because so much of this won't happen again, and we need to be there. And we need to try and get as much as we can of the conversations and the landscape and the detail to then be able to put together some sort of coherent story. And yeah, it's... I do have to look at my nose. And it involves, there's a lot of things that can go wrong, and we have to be prepared that something technical will go wrong. And they do, but we tend to be able to cope with it because we've been doing it for a while. But mainly we don't want to waste what's happening in these wonderful events, the field days and conferences like this. And Arbor has been organising conferences for some years now, or field days, and more recently conferences. And we were putting so much effort into doing that, and there were so many amazing ideas being communicated, and it was inspirational, of course, but it wasn't fulfilling its potential because it just wasn't going far enough. So we realised we had to capture it and share it with people who couldn't be there. And there's, proceedings of conferences and journals, however important they are, they've only got a limited reach, and the ideas within them really need to get a wider audience and connect to people more. So, I've changed. If I want to know something, if I want to learn something new, I find a video and get someone to explain it to me while I'm cooking dinner or something like that. But you go online and look for stories about regen. I think that's changing from what we've been hearing just now, but still a lot of it is about tree planting, which is fine, but I think we understand restoration on a deeper level where we're actually looking for reinstating an ecosystem, and we're looking at a reference community to guide us, and that needs to be heard, and it wasn't really out there enough. So, so we saw a need to inspire other practitioners about what people were already doing, to let scientists know what great work practitioners are doing in the field, and to record the personal stories that we can all connect to and share those. And fortunately, the New South Wales Government Environmental Trust shared our vision and funded us for 3 years to start this. Over to Louise.
My turn, right. So as you can see, we go out and we gather footage, and we're gathering them at conferences as well, and then we edit them and turn them into videos. I'd just like to say that when we go out on the site visits, just the recent ones, if everybody gets very uncomfortable about, getting a microphone or sort of suggesting they move somewhere, and then after about half a day, people just do it, and Virginia sort of goes like this, and everybody moves into the right light and says, "I didn't hear that, would you say it again?" And they just repeat it again, even better than the first time. So everybody gets, it just becomes a natural thing somehow that everybody gets, you have this site visit and everybody's being filmed. So when we get all these videos together, we actually decided at the start we needed some sort of format as to how to sort of group videos and determine what they were and tag them and that sort of thing. And we went through to the SERA national standards, which we've all heard a lot about, and that was an ideal way, and we developed themes, which all the videos are related to, they're categorised under themes. Some of the videos actually address several themes, and each of the themes are related generally back to the national standards. So the themes we have are appropriate approaches, which is to ecological restoration on a site, engaging others, evaluating progress, reference ecosystems, scaling up, and seed sourcing. So to date we've produced and put up on our Arbor website about 39 videos, and they somehow cover all those themes. There's also some educational support materials and fact sheets. The length of videos varies. We have a lot of short presentations, about 5 minutes, and others that are half an hour, which contain a lot more detail. And I thought, I'd never watch a 30-minute video. And the first one I looked at, about the Caledonian forest, I found so fascinating. I sat and watched it all. And so on the website at the moment, it's structured so that you can actually look at all the videos, or you can select a theme, and the ones that come up under that theme will be shown. For our grant-funded project, we had to be able to send back some information on how we monitored and saw what was happening, which is why at the moment it's kept on the Arbor website, because we can get a lot more information, we think, about sort of the views of who does what. And so out of those videos, we've had 3,773 views, which of course will go up in the next week or so. And every video has actually been seen, varying from 35 times to about 200, and that in some cases is probably a reflection of not only the topics but how long they've actually been up on the site. Some have only gone up quite recently. And a couple of the interesting points: the length of the video actually doesn't appear to play a part in whether people choose to watch it or not. But obviously, as you'd expect, the shorter videos are generally 60 to 70% of them are watched through to the end, whereas other videos not so much. But after about 12 minutes, we've still got 50% of viewers watching, so I think that sounds pretty good. And we've had a little bit of, feedback from people making comments about things, saying that, good take-home messages, the right length, etc. So that's all been valuable input. I'll hand back here now.
This is really just the beginning. We've worked out how to do this. We've got set up, and now we're ready to go. We know how much is needed, and of course, I think we're probably all aware that YouTube's the place you go when you want to find a video. Some people can't find us because we're not there, so we'll probably have to do something about that soon. We need to edit a lot more. It's a bit uncomfortable because there's a backlog, and I'm editing as well because it's just so much fun, and because I've got that in mind when I'm recording it all, how it's going to come together. So there's some efficiencies there, but then it's not getting out the other end. But we have been collecting, just because there's been events on that. If we don't get it now, it won't happen again, we'll miss it, and so that's been the priority, to just get the stuff recorded. So yeah, lessons learned, it's the editing's taking a bit longer than we thought. And where do we want to go? Well, we could certainly be covering a lot more events, catching up with what we've already got waiting to come on, perhaps be more organised with training streams. Something like you can, if you're a beginner, you could come and there'd be perhaps 5 videos suggested covering the basics, and you could be assured that if you've watched those, then you've got fairly good grounding of ecological restoration at a basic level. There's lots of opportunities for that, for structured training. But our funding runs out at the end of the year. It pretty much already has run out. So we've got a few ideas about how to keep going, including sponsorship, but we haven't yet bridged that gap. So we're interested to hear your thoughts on what we've been doing and where we could go, and particularly if you have any ideas about sponsorship. And yeah, hopefully you'll be able to watch RegenTV grow over the next few years and enjoy checking in on us. Perhaps you'll be on it. Perhaps some of you are.
Last but not least, just thanking everybody, the Environmental Trust obviously, without which we wouldn't have got this far, and our little RegenTV team, which we came together with a lot of different knowledge and experience, but had never worked on a project like this. And so, we have our project officer, Suzanne, who's up the back there, who organises us all. Virginia, who does all the filming and editing. Teen has a lot of input. We have a web person, Mitra Gusha, and Jane Guy and myself, who do whatever has to be done, and we've been promoted today to members of the film crew. Don't know what we've done, but anyway. And we've got a stand here at the conference in that hall there, and we've got these bright green T-shirts, so it'd be lovely if people came up and had a chat and talked about. We've got a nice banner showing a few things. So come and visit us. Thank you.
Thank you. That's really good. We've got a little bit of time. I was wondering if Suzanne could come down as well, because Suzanne Pritchard is the Education Officer for Arbor and has been managing the field sheets and fact sheets that have been developed for a number of educators who have subscribed to the program.
Hi, we've part of the resources that are available on the website, apart from the 39 videos, is we've got we're aligning the videos to the National Registration Standards and putting together fact sheets and worksheets for educators. We've got about half a dozen TAFEs that are and 2 universities that are reviewing the documentation. So we get feedback, we put forward a worksheet, they provide feedback on it, and then these resources are uploaded on the website as well. We're also hoping to use them as part of an ongoing lifelong learning process, and we'll be working with SERA and SER to try and get them incorporated into the international certification project as well. But even if you're wanting, you're a practitioner and you're wanting, it's rainy or something like that, and you don't want to put your team down for the day, it's a real great opportunity to watch some videos, do some worksheets, and get some professional development in on site or in the car if you're stuck in the car.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Any questions from anybody else?
Does the website just have other videos, or is there scope for us to contribute?
There's in the work.
There is another resource on there. It's full of external links. So primarily at the moment it was the Restore, Regenerate, Renew conference from Armidale, where all of the presentations are also put online, and there's a few other videos. So they're mainly in a table format, and there are direct links. That wasn't the structure of the website didn't allow them to be sort of tagged up as efficiently as what the RegenTV videos are. But if you've got videos, yes, there is a place for them.
Yeah. In fact, it'd be really lovely to link RegenTV to any other resources, so there can be some, cross links made there, especially once we're on YouTube.
So I'm visiting from the United States, and I wish we had a RegenTV.
You don't? How did you travel?
We were asking about funding possibilities, and have you ever thought about corporate funding?
We're thinking of everything, but that's...
Again, I don't know, maybe first time visiting Australia, so it's like I don't think I can apply it. I don't know how this country works, but at least in the United States, you have huge corporations who pay for money, making them feel guilty about
That's right. So there's corporations who may be involved in that and would like to do a bit of greenwashing, but there are also corporations and small companies and sole traders who wouldn't mind making a contribution in exchange for their business name being associated with a very good video. So we think this is a fertile area. It's simply that we haven't had time to pursue it, and when we do, we want to pursue it in an efficient way. So yeah, you'll be hearing from us. There's no doubt. Is there any more questions? Yeah.
Is the target audience people in the industry, or is it landholders of the land?
Yeah, look, it really is people in the industry. It really is an educational process for those, but it doesn't have to be necessarily, very skilled people. It's about learning about regeneration. We hope that it's in plain language and that the images are transferable. Anybody else want to comment on that? And we've really run out of time.
I just think, yes, you select the video, and, some are adaptable for, there's a variety there and a variety of detail, and so they are for learning, but also if you're interested in the subject, then as a beginner, you'll learn a lot.
Yeah. So if it's an area, say they're searchable by any by keywords and themes. Yeah. Have we got locations as well as our keywords? We can certainly expand our keywords, and that means that people can, who live in a certain locality can identify ones that are relevant to them, even though they may not be a practitioner. Yeah. Yes.
So these are training videos as well?
They're recordings of field trips and conference presentations. So insofar as those two things are, they're more educational than training. So they're not designed to train someone in a particular competency, for example. So they're not broken down step by step. This is how you do A, B and C. What I'm concerned about is that this is actually like a free period in that it's a 15-minute session in which there isn't a scheduled talk, but you may want to go and catch another talk in the program. So let me officially close this so that anybody who has another talk to go to can attend the other talk. And if anybody wants to stay and discuss communication about restoration, they're most welcome to do so. Thank you, everyone.